Good morning. Alcor is pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar. Founded in 2008 and headquartered in California, Alcor is a global cloud advisory and implementation services company serving Fortune 500, government agencies, and other leading organizations in multiple industries, verticals across Americas, Canada, and India. Alcor is a ServiceNow Gold Services partner and also partners with Salesforce, FireEye, Microsoft, and WarmGuard. We advise leading businesses on cloud platforms, architecture, enterprise service management, and integrating IT services delivery. We also provide business process consulting to capture, re-engineer, and improve processes that can easily be automated to deliver real value. The Alcor consulting team has in-depth expertise in business strategy, cloud technology, and organizational change management. Our ongoing webinar series is designed to inform, enlighten, and start discussions within your own organizations. If you require any additional information after listening to today's webinar, please reach out to us through our website, www.alcortech.com. Today's webinar is also on social media. You can follow, comment, and get regular updates for today's webinar with the hashtag AlcorWebinar. We have time reserved at the end of the webinar for Q&A, so please feel free to type any questions into the questions section. Today's webinar topic is How to Win with Alcor-Enabled Managed Services, presented by Alex Sapp. Alex is a senior executive at Alcor and has over 25 years experience in business operations, sales, and information technology management. His specialties include business strategy, business process, sales strategy, executive coaching, and high-performance team building. I will now turn the webinar over to Alex.
Thank you, Manisha, for that introduction. So we're going to be talking a little bit about managed services today, and I want to frame that in a number of different ways. Right? There's a lot of confusion in the industry about what managed services is. So we're going to jump into a little bit about definition. We're going to jump into a little bit about historical, and then move forward to see how you can get the best value from managed services. So as kind of a starting point, managed services, from a Wikipedia definition, you can go and look on the web and find many different definitions. But I think this one has some particular key nuggets in it that we want to talk about throughout today's discussion. So as a practice of outsourcing, and I'm not big on the term of outsourcing, you'll see why in a few slides, but the outsourcing as a notion of moving services that used to be in-house to a corporation outside the walls of a corporation. And then on a proactive basis, manage responsibilities, strategic, right? So there are some notions of what do we move outside, right? Is it some functions? Is it strategic? Are we moving things to improve operations and cut expenses? And sometimes those two are in conflict, right? If I think about improving operations, I don't always think about being able to do that cheaper. So, we'll talk about that as well. And then, there are alternatives and a little bit of conflict in the way of definition. In the old model, break, fix, on-demand sourcing, there are a number of terms that we could have used for the old model of outsourcing, which is different from what we think about for managed services today. So we want to kind of jump into a lot of those different areas and talk through those as we go forward. Now, it's valuable to know a little bit about the history of outsourcing, of vendor sourcing, of managed services, right? All the different terminology that crops up in today's world. And I think a lot of those have driven what we see today in that current trend. So if you think about the history of IT, IT used to be a shiny new toy, right? In the beginning, only big companies could have it because it was so expensive and so complicated. And then it started to be a technology commodity. And as it became a commodity, more and more people could help do the services. They could learn on their own. They could go to simplified classes. It wouldn't take 2 months to learn a particular technology. It'd take a couple weeks. And as you get into that technology as a commodity, we had the rise of the vendor. And the rise of the vendor is always an interesting model. Years ago, a friend of mine said he was going to hang up a shingle to do some IT consulting. I said, oh, okay, that's very interesting. So he ended up getting a call. This is one of the days of the phone book. He put his name in the phone book, and he ended up getting a call from a local company. And they had just purchased a Wang word processor. And if you remember those machines, they were about the size of 3 washing machines taped together. They were enormous, complicated devices. So a publishing company in town had just purchased one. It was delivered on a Friday morning. The Wang consultants plugged in all the cables and get everything to work so it popped up on the screen so somebody could log in. Fantastic. On Monday, when the company decided to do their first document on the machine, they realized they hadn't the slightest idea what they were doing. They had books that were literally 4 inches thick on how to generate your first document on your new word processor. So they called my friend. They said, can you come and consult? And he said, sure. So he goes to their offices, and the very first thing he does is he asks for the manuals. He asks for the 4-inch thick manuals. He says, because this is a brand new machine, I want to make sure that what I do follows the model of the upgrade that's available in this machine. So he cloistered himself in the room where they kept the machine, read the manual for about 4 to 6 hours, generated his first document, and then the day after, he started training other people. And that was really kind of the rise of IT consulting, right? It was this notion of somebody could grab a book, they could get familiar based on the technical knowledge that they had, and they could hang up a shingle and become a consultant. And then we had kind of the rise of outsourcing, right? The rise of outsourcing is the whole notion that you could push out different components of your organization to other vendors. And outsourcing is not a new thing, right? IT outsourcing was kind of coming and taking shape, but outsourcing from the standpoint of accounting, right? Accounting has been outsourced for decades. Right? There are other functions. Facilities has been outsourced for decades. So outsourcing as a competency is not new, but IT outsourcing had become a new thing because of the rise of this technology commodity. So a lot of organizations were listening to Michael Hammer and other folks, from re-engineering consulting, and they were saying, okay, we're going to focus on our core competencies. This is a great term, right? What is it you do? If I'm a manufacturing company, manufacturing, widgets, that's really what I want to do. I don't have to want to worry about this new thing, IT, right? I've already outsourced my finance department. I've already outsourced my facilities department. Maybe I should push this new thing, IT, to somebody else, right, to handle for me. So there was this whole push, re-engineering the corporation, a lot of things that pushed folks to push out IT. And then what happened is, that transferred a little bit to rise of managed services. And managed services was a slightly different model in that now we're looking at value-based, right? No longer is it okay just to push out IT. Now we're going to think about what value do certain parts of that have. What things should I keep in, right? Whether it's because of security, right? Valuable information that I need to keep. And so I can only push out small parts of the organization. And that was really where a clip comes between outsourcing and managed services. And then we had the rise of SaaS, right? Software as a service. And if you think about it, software as a service is outsourcing as well. You're outsourcing the infrastructure, right? We think about the ServiceNow world. You no longer have servers on your premises that are hosting ServiceNow. That's all done in the cloud somewhere. Somebody else is managing it. Somebody else is making sure that you have 5 nines of access and capability of the machine. Somebody else is determining when that thing gets upgraded, right? Another trend toward managing the services of IT infrastructure, and that'll continue to go as over time. So what we really saw in the vendor services, and we're going to drill down a little bit into some of these different aspects a little bit, and identify why there is a difference, and to identify why it makes sense to push towards a managed services model versus some of the other models that are out there. So when you think about a vendor services model, what it really was is movement of staff. And a lot of the vendors that would come in were break fix, right? Something has gone down. My server has gone down. My network has gone down. My application has gone down. So it's this notion that you're going to bring people into the organization to fix that, right? I'm going to call vendor A to get this particular service. I'm going to call vendor B to get that particular service. And you're augmenting the teams of folks that you have in the organization. And that was really a lot of the old vendor services model, right? The benefits were you could call people on demand. You get a cost basis that's determined against that specific break fix or that specific small body of work that you need covered. Some of the challenges, though, were when you were dealing with vendor services, it was the knowledge, right? That ability that the reason that you hired an outside vendor is because they had knowledge, but you hired a particular body of work and then they went away and took their knowledge with them, right? And then there's a cost component. How do we balance the cost between bringing folks in and the value that we get? And then there's a little bit of unpredictability, right? You were hiring someone for 3 months and now the issue has grown or it's extended. Now you have them for 6 months, 7 months. And then at what point do legal and regulations kick in to where that person is no longer considered a vendor? They're actually considered a staff member, right? And then you have tax considerations. So there's a lot that goes into that model. And then slower speed of execution because particularly the vendor doesn't know your environment as well as you do, right? If you're a retailer selling your clothing in a particular area, how do you get that vendor to understand your business model and your business cycles, when things are impactful and when they're not impactful? And then the traditional outsourcing model, right? The traditional outsourcing model is all about moving big blocks of capability, right? So, back in the day, a lot of folks would, a lot of the companies, they would move their enterprise services out to a vendor. And then what would happen, and most of you on the phone have been in IT long enough, is that at some point in time they'd be unhappy. So they'd move all that stuff back to themselves. And then they'd think, oh, this is just too hard and too complicated. So they'd move it out to another vendor. And this was really kind of that bungee effect that traditional outsourcing had. It was kind of humorous, right? For a lot of us who have been through these cycles with big companies, that cycle of outsourcing, insourcing, outsourcing, insourcing is a little bit humorous, but it's hugely cost impactful, right? The cost to move your organization out, and then the cost to bring it back if you're unhappy, and then the cost to move it right back out the door is huge. The benefits as they were touted in the initial move to outsourcing were all about focus, right? And I still agree that focus is huge. The fact that you don't have to do something that's not your core competency is actually a good thing. But some of the challenges, in getting that to happen were, that crazy cost, rise over time. And the whole model about outsourcing, if you think about outsourcing, right? Typically, you're taking your infrastructure, your people, and you're passing it to an outsourcer, someone else. And when that happens, the way that the outsourcer is going to make money is to fix those costs. So they want to lock down that technology. They don't want to improve the technology. That's not beneficial, right? So they're not wanting to improve the technology. They're not wanting to upgrade the capability. A lot of things that happen in a standard outsourcing environment, the way that the outsourcer is making money is to lock things in. And over time, that functionality stays the same, but from a business perspective, it actually gets less and less, right? There's no rise in productivity. And then knowledge capture, since you pushed out not only the staff, but the management as well, you really lose a lot of that knowledge that needs to be kept within the organization. And then visibility, right? I was with a customer on Tuesday of this week, and they're a large retail customer, and they have a fantastic business model, very happy customers. And they were talking about the fact that they outsourced their IT model. And the very first thing that they said was visibility. We don't feel we have any visibility into what's happening with our IT services. And again, they have issues with compliance, right? These days, security is huge, compliance is huge, SOX, right? There are a number of initiatives from a government perspective that impact businesses today, and they feel they need that visibility. And that visibility isn't there because management has gone over, functions have gone over. A lot is lost in that usual, move to outsourcing. And then what we're trying to do today is managed services, right? Managed services, really the key with managed services is defining a value-based component of the functions that you're trying to move, right? So instead of moving a whole block of information, you're trying to pick up those items, right? I have one item that works for partner A, right? And that function, set of functions, et cetera, is very specific. They may be based on a specific corporate strategy. They may be based on a specific way that the organization can get something done with a partner that can provide more value, right? You go out and you assess a number of partners. And I'm going to be using the word partner when we talk about managed services. Typically, managed services are couched in terms of a three-letter acronym that says MSP, Managed Service Provider. And what I really want to make sure that we understand is it's not a managed service provider that provides benefit, it's the managed services partner. So MSP, when you talk to us, Alcor, we're thinking about managed services partner. And there's a few things that go into that. So let's continue to talk about that. So managed services, the value component, right? Those items that you find value. Your partner, if you find a good partner in specific areas, that partner should be able to provide more value. And part of what that partner is doing is it still allows you to focus. It still allows you to fix costs. But the cost is typically more granular, right? You're not outsourcing your whole IT department. You're picking specific areas where you believe you can get better value, better performance, better function, right? Not just pushing out the cost of that item. And then maintaining management control. Management control is one of the models of a managed services, today's managed services, that's a little bit different. You may be pushing out the function of what needs to get delivered, but you're retaining that management piece, right? So a lot of customers are working on things like, governance, risk, and compliance. Governance, risk, and compliance from a compliance issue and from a regulatory issue, the organization needs to keep that management function, but what it can do with the different managed services partners is push out the getting it done. They can push out the controls, and they can push out the policy work, and they can push out the auditing work to a partner who's actually going to deliver value. But the actual management of those functions, the oversight of those functions, the reporting on those functions, that piece, that management control piece, stays within inside the organization. And that's a key differential between managed services versus outsourcing. Some of the challenges you still find, though, is you have to find the best of breed, right? How do I find that best partner to help me succeed in that area? And that's still a challenge today. Adjusting the speed of execution. And again, one of the reasons you do a managed services model is to gain higher value, and one of those higher values may be better speed of execution. So there are partners that will allow you to get better speed than if you had it internally, just because they know the space better, or they have people who've been in the space longer, trained and certified. They have 100 certified resources, whereas you're struggling to hire those 2 certified resources in your own organization. There are reasons why you would push that on value and that speed basis, but you as an organization need to do a good job adjusting for that in the partner agreements, right? The contracts that might pop up. You have to do a good job of managing that from a management control perspective. And then again, key knowledge is still an issue, right? And when you're delivering that functional value, some of that knowledge should stay at the management level, right? The managers know what's going on and when it's being done and who's doing what, even though it's being provided by a managed services partner. It's still key for some of that knowledge to be controlled, and that's still a challenge, right? How do you keep that knowledge? How do you continue to grow your organization moving forward? And then just coordination. In the old days, in the outsourcing model, you pushed everything across, and you just assumed that everything was getting done, right? You wrote this big, long outsourcing contract, and it had hundreds and hundreds of SLAs, and you checked in once a month, once a quarter, whatever the time period was. Are you hitting the SLAs? And you check that box. But managed services side is, since the enterprise retains control, there's a lot more coordination, a lot more oversight that's happening. It goes beyond just having a couple of SLAs on a contract document. So again, moving in those different functions, I'm going to click through this next part. So some of the managed services characteristics, right? So some of the key characteristics are fixed costs, right? So if we think about that, similar to what you're doing when you contract particular resources or you contract an outsourcing service, you wanted to make sure that you're trying to nail down what the cost is, right? You don't want any surprises. As an organization, that's the last thing you need is a surprise in terms of cost. It would be great if the cost went down, but that's typically not what happens, right? You get a cost bump. And for a lot of IT organizations today, I know that when I was running my IT organization, there was this notion of the 3% cut or the 5% cut. Every year, the organizations get cut back just a little bit more. So the notion of having variable costs is difficult. So we want to make sure that when you're jumping into a cost relationship on the managed services side, you understand the multiple levels of service. Typically in managed services, there are a lot of different options. So you want to make sure that you understand those. You want to make sure that you can put in agreements that maybe even the cost will vary based on levels of performance. So if your partner delivers better performance, they might get a little bump for that, right? But if bad news is if the partner delivers worse performance, you're still monitoring and can capture some of those dollars back so that there's an equal ratio of dollars spent to value attained by the organization. And then scaling. A lot of organizations, when they sign agreements with managed services partners, there's a scaling mechanism in place. As you use more services, the partnership agreement will scale up. But the thing that people don't watch for is they don't watch for that automatic scaling ability to scale down. So a lot of organizations get locked in the contract where it scales up over time, but as business changes and modifies, there isn't that same scaling down factor. And that's something you have to watch for and manage as you go forward. And then metrics bound, right? It's all about the metrics, right? Time-based metrics, delivery based on times, measurable performance, right? What are those SLAs? So SLAs don't go away, but you do a better job defining them. And those SLAs can be in categories of service. So if you think about multiple levels of service, you can have multiple levels of SLAs based on those multiple levels of service. And it can get complex, but when you're working in a partnership relationship, that's really where the value is, right? Determining the right ones, being able to manage those over time. If you have to engage scaling, being able to be flexible on managing the SLAs that goes with that scaling as well. And then proactive improvement. If you think about the days of the outsourcing, we started to talk about the fact that someone outsources their infrastructure. The way that the outsourcer made money was keeping that infrastructure fixed. It didn't really benefit the outsourcer to add new upgrades, to add new capabilities, to do things better in the relationship. It really kind of benefited the outsourcer to lock it. In today's managed services, it's all about making sure that you're choosing partners who are continuing to build in opportunities for productivity improvements, not only for you, but for the partner. So as their productivity improves, going back to that measured performance and metrics component, as the partner's capabilities improve, it should give you, the enterprise, an improvement capability as well. And a lot of times that improvement in capability will be something that's measured and bound into the contract for the way that both of you can attain value from that relationship. And then just skill upgrades, right? We think about the skilling in an organization. Pick a partner who's dedicated to their people. Right? One of the things we look at is, what's the model of the company that you're going in with, right? What's that connection and culture? And if you're working with partners who value their people, right, put a lot of effort and time into their people so that their people can give high quality of service, you're on the right path if you're looking for a good managed services partner. Let's talk a little bit about perspectives, right? If you think about managed services from perspective base, we do a lot of work with ServiceNow, right? And we talked earlier that the infrastructure capabilities that a lot of these software as a service providers, that is managed, right? ServiceNow has incredibly high uptime compared to any of the other SaaS vendors in their space. They have the highest, right, and the best measurable service uptime. Right? So they have infrastructure. They have servers out there in the cloud running in multiple data centers, and all that infrastructure is managed for you, the customer. And then on top of that, they put their applications in their software. So even though they're technically designated as a software as a service vendor, it's really about that underlying infrastructure they've built in to be able to do that, for you, the customer. When you think from a services space, there are a number of different extensions and services that you can do. Right? Some of those extensions may be keeping the lights on. I know there was a big push to outsource email services, and even today, Outlook 365 as an online service offering, as a SaaS offering. That's a big push that a lot of companies are going to. So it's some of those keeping the lights on, right? Email over time has become a commodity. It's not all that interesting. You send somebody a message, and you can receive their message, you can send a message, add other people to that stream. It's a commodity, but it's a commodity that helps us keep the lights on because it's something that we've all gotten attached to. Extended implementation are those things that are strategic and roadmapable. Right, within the organization. And those are really those long-term efforts to improve an organization's capability, productivity, value to its customers. So I, as a big company, I might want to do certain things for my customers. But the only way to do that is engage in technology initiatives that take time, that take a long time. So one of the service-based initiatives that you can do is you can enter into contracts where your managed services partner really gives that level of long-term roadmap, focused, deliverable on a schedule, working with you, over time to deliver higher and higher value to your customers as a whole. And then specific functions, right? There's still this notion of placing managed services on things that are function-based, right? Security, outsourcing, certain security efforts in the organization. Things like network management, right? Networking has become a commodity that should be able to be easily pushed over to managed services from that perspective of moving that value-based perspective out of the organization. So again, there are a number of different managed services that can be offered, and it really is a key to organizations to look at what's the value that I'm trying to get from my functions within the IT perspective, and how do I move those to someone who can help me and who can partner with me. And here's one of the big areas, right? And typically when we talk about myths, right, the whole notion of is it fact or fiction? Some of the things we're going to talk about on this slide are fact and fiction all at the same time, right? And that kind of gets that confusion. That's what causes confusion in a number of organizations. But the first one, no visibility. You have to put that first because, again, it's so clear and recent when we're talking with customers, and that's still an issue in folks who are doing an outsource model. But if you think about working with a partner, right, a managed services partner, I'm going to go back to that MSP terminology, right? I'm going to change that MSP terminology. If you're working with a managed services partner, that visibility is one of the first key things that you address, right? How do I maintain visibility? Since I, the company, am maintaining management control, I should have a certain level of visibility. I should know what the functional staff is working on. I should know when those things are getting done. So whether it's reporting, whether it's knowledge transfer, whether it's education, right, there are a number of things that can be done, a number of things that Alcor does from a from an organizational change perspective, where once you launch something into the managed services space, there's an organizational change that has to happen within inside the company to be able to consume that in a way that maintains this visibility. So yes, in an outsourcing relationship, visibility is still something that hinders a company. But when you talk about managed services, that's something that should be built into the relationship. Lack of control. And again, a lot of what you see on this list has been from that traditional outsourcing model. So as you think about a managed services, one of the core tenets of managed services is maintaining management control. So you should be maintaining that control. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to give up control from a contractual standpoint because you don't understand how the model works. So it's always good, again, to work with partners who are, completely transparent on the way that they manage the business, how much control you maintain as an enterprise versus how much you're going to give to the managed services partner. So that lack of control, again, is one of those legacy things that comes from an outsourcing model. Cost can spiral out of control. And again, this is another fact and or fiction. So if you were working with a good partner, they lock you, and I'm going to say lock, and we'll talk about that. Typically, you write a contract that establishes boundaries and a framework up front. I can kind of consider that locking in phase one. But over time, what you want to make sure is that your partners are flexible enough that you can change based on your business model. So the whole notion of costing is that you set a schedule for costs based on a defined value set, but you know that when you're working with your partner, those things are flexible, right? I need to make business changes depending on business cycles. I need to make business changes based on mergers and acquisitions that I didn't even see 6, 8, 10 months ago, but that's coming up to be an issue now that I need to make changes. And that flexibility needs to be built into your partnership relationship. Intellectual property. And again, this is a little bit of visibility, but it is that knowledge component that we talked about earlier, right? Knowledge is key in today's organizations. Are you just buying a function? Or are you buying also the understanding of how to continue to do that function in the future? The old term, are you catching fish for someone, or are you teaching them how to fish? And you always want to make sure that as an organization, you're thinking about picking partners who can teach you how to fish, so that this doesn't come as an impactful component in the organization. And then the ownership of that knowledge, right? Again, that transfer of knowledge and making sure that the organization always retains a certain amount of knowledge. That knowledge is documented. Right? That's one of the big things, is that can someone deliver a function, but also can they deliver a function and then document what they did, document how they impacted value, documented how they improved customer management, et cetera. So that documentation then becomes key in the organization. But also key is not just being delivered a document. How can that document be made more valuable? Right? We use a lot of tools today, whether it's Slack or a number of other communication tools. How do we get that information into repositories and knowledge bases and places where people can utilize that information in the organization? Right? So there has to be some sort of shared mechanism that transfers knowledge back to the organization from your managed services partner. And then the cookie cutter approach, right? To preserve value in a lot of organizations, you get the contract, and the contract is pretty standard. But the key to a partnership relationship is, how do I make that contract work? Right? What are some of the things I can do to better the position on the contract? And that's flexibility. It's levels of capability, right? So if you're working with a partner, make sure that they're not just providing one level of service or 2 levels of service. Make sure they have flexibility, levels of capability, right? So it doesn't become a cookie cutter. Because you as an organization getting the best value, you're really looking at a way to tailor the approach for managed services to your organization. And the service is becoming static, right? That's the whole notion where if I just hand items over for the company, for outsourcing companies to make money, you have to keep it locked in or have to keep it static. And that's really not what a partnership is. A partnership is about growing together, as partners moving forward. And then alignment, right? If you think about strategy, your company's strategy is growing, right? You might have a 3-year plan, you might have a 5-year plan on strategy. Your company's strategy is building and growing and morphing and changing over time. And you need to have a partner who understands your strategy, right? They're not just taking simple requests and delivering on a simple request. They're in the room with you, hearing what your initiatives are for the year, right? Your initiatives change every 6 months. They're in the room listening every 6 months for those changes. How does that impact the delivery of value? Right? So again, it is that partnership, which is that shared information. So now, not only are they transferring, the managed services partner, are transferring knowledge back about what they're doing, but they're also receiving knowledge about how your business is changing. And that receiving of knowledge helps them do a better model of how they deliver services. And then managed services are really staff augmentation in disguise. I love that one because, again, that can be true or it can be false based on the partner that you select. Right? So the whole notion of we're just providing staff to provide X, Y, Z. And again, that again is up to the organization to a large degree in determining what are those things that are going to be providing value, right? And if those items that are providing value are fairly small, they don't require a lot of resources, it can feel like we're getting staff. But I think the big thing in that partnership, again, goes back to, does the managed services partner know your strategy? Are the people they're providing in your industry, right? Can they provide value on a number of different components to make you more successful? Or is it really just that you're paying $70 an hour and they're having a body show up chair? That's largely driven by the organization. And then the notion of partnership. I go back to, is it a managed service provider or is it a managed services partner? It's really up to you as the organization to be able to understand that relationship, right, some of the things that we've talked about today, and then to be able to engage with a true partner, not just a provider, not just someone who's going to take a ticket order. All right, and getting the most out of it, right? And talk a little bit more about the partnership. Partnership is key, and that's one of the things we do at Alcor is partnership. Again, we're just redefining that term, right? Not managed service provider, it's a managed services partner. That's one thing I can help folks understand today is a lot of the myths that we talked about will continue to burn into the organization's tribal knowledge because they are based on this lack of partnership. So one of the things that we do at Alcor is we focus strategically on the partnership. Right? And about the partnership, it's strategy and planning. So not only does your organization have a strategy for the core things that need to happen every year, that strategy needs to fall into different components. So we've got organization develops strategy, those strategies get driven out to objectives, those objectives get driven out to organizational initiatives. So there may be initiatives in HR, and there may be initiatives in if it's a retailer, initiatives the stores out there and who serving customers have to do. There are initiatives that the accounting department has to engage in. There are initiatives that IT engages in. Right? Those are very natural. So part of the organization's responsibility and the partner's responsibility is having those discussions on how did the strategy for IT get built? What are those initiatives that are key? How are we going to deliver value against those? Not only from delivering specific functions, but really getting connected to the understanding of what has to happen over time, why certain things are important, why certain goals in the organization are important. Right? Are those goals linked to visibility? Are those goals linked to speed of execution? Are those goals linked to a certain amount of risks and security that has to happen has been driven out from organization strategy? A lot of that strategy and planning goes into what should make the customer relationship more profitable from a partnership-based thinking. Culture. Culture is huge. Right? If you think about it, a lot of IT cultures over years, some IT cultures because of the culture within the organization of cutting IT 3% this year, cutting it 2% next year, cutting it 4% the year after that. A lot of that cost cutting sets an IT culture, right? And it's cost cutting and cost containment. But then there may be organizations where cost is their main thing. Like Walmart, we will never sacrifice being able to provide the lowest price and lowest cost to our customers. That's one of their organizational cultures. Whereas other cultures, when you think of some folks like Neiman Marcus or Saks Fifth Avenue, they're providing a high quality service to a high quality customer base, right? That's all driven into the culture. You think about something like a Ritz-Carlton. Ritz-Carlton has a white glove system how they treat their customers. You go and stay at a Ritz-Carlton, if there's an issue with the room, walk out to the door and see the maid. You talk to the maid about your issue, and the maid has the power to fix your issue. The maid has the power to move your room. The maid has the power to get you tickets to a ball game. That's something that will help you feel better about your experience. It's those cultures within organizations that you really need to make sure that you understand. So the partnership, someone like Alcor is really about a partnership with the organization, not only strategy and planning, but culture, because the culture of who you are as an organization matters. And as a partner, We need to be able to understand that and be able to move that forward. The mutual definition of success. If you think about it, success can't be just something that we deliver on a piece of paper, right? These are the SLAs that we're going to deliver to you, Mr. Customer. That doesn't work. So the partnership is really about how do we find those things that will help you be more successful, and how do they work based on certain things like strategy and planning, certain things like culture, certain things like how do we work as a partner. So again, it comes at that from a mutual perspective. Flexibility is key. If you think about it, your business is changing. Right? We already talked about business acquisition. Right? There's a lot of consolidation in a number of different industries, and that impacts the business, how it works, how people come together. Initiatives that can sometimes start at a moment's notice. Right? So as a partner, we need to be flexible over time. And we've built that into the way that we interact with our customers. And then scaling. Right? Scaling is huge. If you're in different areas, scaling can be based on business. The ability to scale functionality over the holidays, right? The Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, that's future retailers, right? So the ability to understand scaling, to modify services based on scaling, to be able to throttle up and throttle down, huge. Right? And having that capability as a partner is really going to be key to making you successful. And then visibility, right? I've hit this a number of different times, but this is really where you as an organization get a level of comfort working with a partner, right? Be able to have that visibility of knowledge, have that visibility of communication, have that visibility of reporting and data that's passed in the organization. Visibility is key in working with a partner who understands that, that key parameter to any partnership that we might engage in. And then the ability to maintain management control, right? We go over to the management control because that has been such an issue over the last couple of decades, because where outsourcing started, be able to understand that management control, make sure there's enough leverage in the organization that if some management control has to be passed, to us, the partner, we understand what we're accepting, we understand why that's important, and we can work with you to share control over time. And then investment in people, right? I talked about the investment in people. If you look at certain organizations, but if you look at Virgin Media, Virgin Mobile, Virgin Atlantic as a service, right? One of the things that Richard Branson, and again, whether or not you like his politics, that's neither here nor there. But from a company perspective, because of his outlook on people are the ultimate resource, right? You hire good quality people, you treat them with respect, you help them to gain more knowledge. Right? If you do those things, they'll be able to provide extreme measures of customer service to your customers, and at the end of the day, that will make you more successful as a company. Right? We have that same sort of mentality where our people are key. Our people are key to the managed services relationship and delivering value to you, the customer, which at the end is the key of the whole managed services outlook. Right? Value to you as the customer. So for us, people are key. Right? Who we hire and how we train them, and a long-term perspective on getting the best quality of service with our people. And then investing in outcomes, right? If you're interested in models where contracts can be based on performance, right? We can do that because we want to invest in that outcome. We believe that the more and more we make you successful, that should have to make us successful, right? And that's building that partnership over time. So over time, we both benefit from that partnership in a long-range perspective. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of perspective about where we got to managed services today, right? Some of the things that were broken in outsourcing relationships, some of the quirks of vendor services relationships, how we kind of define those different models, and how we've moved into a managed services world today. And again, you can still find folks who take on the managed service provider mantle, and they're still doing outsourcing, right? And if that helps you, wonderful. But we know with a lot of organizations today that are looking at value, what you're really looking for is a managed services partner, right? Someone who understands the space, who's been in it for a long enough time to have delivered great quality of service to a number of customers, and can really help and push you forward from that perspective. So as we open up the door for Q&A, I want to make sure that we can get a few questions answered here and move you further along in your road to getting a managed service provider and partner on board. So Manisha, how are we doing with our question?
Yeah, I have a few questions.
Okay.
All right. So let's get started. So the first question is, I understand that most managed services contracts have a year or more term. How can we get out of a contract like that when our business shifts dramatically?
You know, that's a great question, and it actually raises a good point. Typically, managed service providers, the contracts are a year, 2 years, 3 years, right? If you think about someone like a ServiceNow from an infrastructure or SaaS perspective, most of their contracts are 3 years long. You think of service providers like Alcor on a managed service perspective. Yep, I think the bulk of our contracts are a year long with automatic extension, and those things are put into place to kind of manage delivery of capability, manage staffing, right? So it's things we do from a services perspective. But I think what's key is in most of our contracts, when we work with our partners, with our customers' partners, we allow you those business change initiatives. So we allow you a 30-day transition plan or a 60-day transition plan, even if they're in the middle of your year, right? We've built that into our contracts to understand that you as a business have changes, right? If it's a merger or acquisition, if it's a complete change in a business model, if it's something that you have to ramp up very quickly or ramp down very quickly based on anything that happens. We do build those things in from a partnership perspective into the contracts that we write. So we have a flexible contract that allows you to make business transitions and things that make sense for you as an organization.
Perfect.
What else?
Thank
What else
you.
is out there?
Thank you so much. How do we determine the parts of the IT business to migrate to an MSP?
Yeah, that's always a tough one because again, the old model was outsourcing. You just pushed everything over, and today you're looking for those parts of value. And the way that I think of it, it can be on a number of different components. In a business model, and then we'll go back to ServiceNow. In a business model with ServiceNow, the company has been ramping so fast in the last several years. There are a lot of businesses who are taking on ServiceNow. I think company growth is in the neighborhood of 60% per year over year for the last several years. In those models, what we're hearing from a lot of customers, we can't find the right resources. And you start out from a resource perspective and you go, okay, that's a small perspective. What you're really telling me is you can't figure out a way to deliver the value against the thing called the ServiceNow enterprise platform. So what we do in a lot of those situations is, okay, you may start from a perspective of, I can't find a resource. But what we're really going to talk to you about is, well, you can't find the resources, which is a smaller component of, I can't build the value inside to deliver this function. Other terms, it may be just, cost perspective, right? I've built up this large organization, but it's somewhat inflexible. I haven't been able to spend the dollars to train my people to do X, Y, Z. I'm looking for a way to get a huge jump in value in productivity out of this particular function within IT. So, that question, I think, how do I find out the right parts of the organization to push to managed services is, again, built on that strategy and plan. What's the strategy for my IT organization? What parts of those organizations are delivering value? And again, maybe that's an assessment. I know a lot of our customers are taking assessments these days of, what are we delivering from an organization? How does that align with the business? And then they're looking at those places in their organization that are underperforming. So maybe it's a commodity, maybe it's an underperforming organization, or maybe it is a place where you start with a basis of, I can't find the right staff to do X. How can I build value around that? So really the whole answer to that question is around, I get so far into these conversations I sometimes forget the question. But I think the whole answer to that question is make sure that you sit down with a partner like Alcor and really talk about your strategy and your plan. And from that strategy and planning, let us help you make the right decisions about what you can push over to a managed services partner.
All right. The third question is, how can you, the vendor, guarantee that I will always have the same resources providing the service?
Yeah, and I think that's another one of those questions that have come out of the outsourcing world, right? I've taken my staff and I've pushed them over to you as a outsourced vendor, and he worked under my flag for 2 years, and I want to make sure that they maintain under your flag for the next several years. It really is some of that legacy perspective that drives, I think, questions like that. And for us, it's built on knowledge. We talked a lot about knowledge and making sure that visibility and communication and knowledge sharing and knowledge retention. So sometimes when we think about it, we put on particular staff for a piece of managed services business, and that staff then starts to gain knowledge. They gain knowledge about your business. They gain knowledge about your environment, your culture, right? Some of those things that we talked about were key to making a good partnership relationship. The people that we would put onto those projects gain that. But in larger projects, there's enough sharing in the organization. We have very low turnover. I think our turnover is less than 5%, which is, for the IT industry, is actually pretty good. But in larger MSP projects, where we think about it, you have 6, 7, 8, 9 people. There is enough cross-sharing of functions. There is enough sharing of knowledge within the organization. We are pushing knowledge back to you as the company. But that's less of an issue to have 1 or 2 people, right, if we need to flex those resources. In smaller engagements where we're only pushing over a small capability, right, and you think to yourself, well, okay, I need to push over 1 or 2 resources, then that becomes more of an issue for the company. Right? I've only really contracted for this very small specific base of knowledge. That knowledge could be delivered by 1 or 2 people. How do I guarantee that there's, low turnover, that knowledge is kept? And I think for us as an organization, we've always been about the business of backups. Right? If you think about it from your organization, from a technology perspective, you back up your data, you back up your servers, you have failover, et cetera. So from an infrastructure perspective, IT has always been big on backups. In a services perspective, we almost do the same thing. Right? If we know that we're going into a value-based position, and then a value-based position only requires 1 or 2 resources, we do a job of backing up so that we can have folks, staffing up in the background. They get a perspective on your company. They get a perspective on the work. They may spend a few hours, doing some work in the project so that they get to know your systems and technology. So for us, it's utilizing that concept of backups, which have been huge in IT, but applying it to a services perspective and always making sure that you're protected as a customer. What else can we answer?
Last question, Alex.
Yeah.
The question is, if we sign up for a period of time with a set amount of hours per month, is it use it or lose it scenario where these hours disappear, or can they be carried over throughout the term?
That's a great question too, because I think those are one of the keys that has been put in by a number of managed service partners, basically to give a set a set perspective on how we can deliver. So if we build a bundle and that managed services says, yep, we're going to deliver this capability and this value in 20 hours a week, and that 20 hours a week is going to go on for the next year, et cetera. And then in the contract, then it's that question of, okay, is there a floor? So typically there is a floor, right? If we contract for something like 20 hours, there'll be a 10-hour floor. It says, yep, we've contracted for 20. We want to allow flexibility. We may not always have 20 hours a week, but we've contracted a floor that says, yep, absolutely, we're going to do 10. That's a way for us, a provider, to make sure that you always have a consistent level of staffing. And there's flexibility, right? Depending on how we write the contract, we may allow it to push in 60 days, 30 or 60 days push, but then consume those dollars at some point at a future date. So there's a number of ways that we can do that. But the whole reason I think for us as a partner to set a threshold is really to make sure that you guarantee a level of service, right? It goes almost back to that staffing question. It's being able to guarantee that we have a level of service that we can provide value to you, so we set a threshold on a typical basis. But the answer is, once we set a threshold, we can also talk about flexibility over time, right? What do you really need from your business operations? And as we know, retailers and a number of folks have these fluctuations in business where we may ramp up and do a lot of work over a short period of time and then drop back for 3 or 4 months, right? And we can be flexible based on your business because we want to be a partner, right? We've been doing this long enough that we understand our model and we understand how to help you from a number of different industries, whether it's manufacturing or retail, and be able to understand that those businesses have fluctuality and that we can be flexible in all of that.
Thank you, Alex. That's great. So that's it from the question side. The recording of today's webinar will be available on our website, www.alcotech.com, and our social networking sites. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. See you at our next webinar. Thank you very much, and thanks, Alex.
Thank you.